Imagine a sovereign nation waking up and they find their most critical military bases are suddenly surrounded.
Right, and their government buildings are just completely occupied.
Exactly. Massive swaths of their territory are effectively annexed overnight. But, and here's the crazy part, the forces executing this flawless takeover, they are not wearing a single recognizable uniform.
Yeah, they have weapons, sure, but they absolutely refuse to identify themselves or say who they work for.
Meanwhile, the target country's banking system just mysteriously goes completely offline.
Just total digital blackout.
Right, and local news stations start broadcasting these completely fabricated stories of government corruption, while foreign social media bots whip the civilian population into just a terrified frenzy.
It is a total collapse of society, but engineered from the outside.
And within weeks, the map of the world has been permanently redrawn. The invading power achieves this massive geopolitical victory. And, the real kicker.
They did it without officially declaring war.
Yes. Without declaring war, and without firing a single conventional artillery shell. Welcome to the Doctrine Deep Dive.
It really is a terrifying scenario, mostly because it completely breaks the mental model most of us have when we think about global conflicts.
Right. We are conditioned to look for the clear signals, like a formal declaration of war.
Exactly. We expect to see armored divisions moving across a border or, fighter jets scrambling. But in the modern geopolitical environment, those recognizable signals are deliberately masked.
They're hidden in plain sight.
Yeah. The most consequential battles are actually being fought in the spaces right between peace and open conflict.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. Because for you listening with us today, we are unpacking one of the most vital, dangerous, and honestly, frequently misunderstood concepts in modern global security.
We are finally going to figure out what exactly irregular warfare actually is.
And we're not just giving you some abstract academic theory today either. We are looking directly at the official playbook.
The literal doctrine.
Yes. Over the past week, I have been poring over this massive stack of official government and military doctrine to try and understand how the Department of Defense and really the wider United States government view this entire shadow conflict.
And looking at the official doctrine is really the only way to truly understand this stuff.
Why is that?
Well, because how the military defines a problem directly dictates how they spend billions of dollars to organize, train, and equip their forces to actually solve it.
That makes a lot of sense. So for you listening, here is the stack of reading we are pulling from today. We are leaning heavily on the 2020 summary of the Irregular Warfare Annex to the National Defense Strategy.
Which really sets the modern tone for everything we are talking about.
Exactly. We're also grounding this in Joint Publication 1, Volume 1, which is basically the foundational manual for joint warfighting,
right,
alongside the Irregular Warfare Curriculum Development Guide from the Joint Staff and the Department of Defense Instruction 3000.07. Oh, and also a really fantastic Congressional Research Service defense primer on the subject.
That is a lot of heavy reading.
It is. But before we get completely lost in the weeds of all these military manuals, I think we have to start with a baseline.
A definition?
Right. Because the term irregular warfare gets thrown around on the news constantly, usually just as a buzzword. So when we strip away all the jargon, how does the doctrine actually define what we are talking about?
So the foundational documents define irregular warfare as a struggle among state and non-state actors to influence populations and affect legitimacy.
Okay, wait, let me pause you there. To influence populations and affect legitimacy.
Yes, and the doctrine explicitly points out that this struggle can be violent, or, and this is key, it can be entirely nonviolent.
Nonviolent warfare. That almost sounds like an oxymoron.
It does, but it relies heavily on indirect and asymmetric approaches. The ultimate goal is the erosion of an adversary's power, influence, and will.
Rather than just the physical destruction of their military forces.
Exactly. You are going after their will to fight, not just their weapons.
The word legitimacy seems to carry the most weight in that whole definition. It fundamentally changes the win condition of a conflict, right?
Oh, absolutely. It changes the entire game.
Like, if traditional warfare is a massive heavyweight boxing match, where the goal is just to physically knock out your opponent.
Blunt force trauma.
Right, just swing it until they drop. Irregular warfare is more like a complex political chess game played in the shadows, where the goal is to convince the audience that the opponent doesn't even have the right to be in the ring in the first place.
That is a really great way to put it. I also like the analogy of taking a sledgehammer to a brick wall versus water seeping into the foundation.
Oh, I love that. Expand on that for a second.
Well, traditional warfare is the sledgehammer. You just keep hitting the wall until the physical structure collapses.
Right.
But irregular warfare is the water. It seeps into the tiny cracks in the foundation over time. Then it freezes, it expands, and it slowly cracks the concrete from the inside.
And eventually the wall just collapses under its own weight.
Exactly. The sledgehammer destroys the wall directly, but the water destroys the wall's structural integrity, so it can't stand up anymore.
That water metaphor is incredibly accurate when you think about the mechanism of action here. Because in traditional warfare, your metric of success is just quantifiable physical destruction, right?
Yeah, you count the number of enemy tanks you destroyed.
Or the square miles of territory you captured.
Right. But in irregular warfare, the metric of success is much more psychological and, well, political.
Which is fascinating because Joint Publication 1, Volume 1 actually updated the classic principles of joint operations.
Yeah.
You know, things like objective, mass, and maneuver.
Oh, right. They added to that list.
Yes. They actually included the principle of legitimacy. The doctrine dictates that the perception of legitimacy is what maintains legal and moral authority.
And that is the crux of it. Because if a government loses its legitimacy in the eyes of its own people, I mean, no amount of armor or air power can save it.
Because the population itself is the prize?
Exactly. The population is the terrain you are fighting over.
Okay, so reading through the 2020 summary of the Irregular Warfare Annex, I noticed something really interesting. There is this very distinct sense of, well, almost institutional paranoia.
Paranoia? How so?
The authors of this document seem deeply, deeply concerned that the United States military is somehow going to forget how to do this. They spent a lot of time warning against this boom and bust cycle.
Oh, right. The boom and bust?
Yeah. Why is the Department of Defense so worried about their own memory?
Well, to be honest, it's because history proves they have a really bad habit of institutional amnesia when it comes to this specific type of conflict.
Meaning they learn the hard lessons and then just immediately forget them.
Pretty much. The boom in that cycle refers to periods where the United States is actively forced to engage in irregular conflicts.
Okay, like when?
Think of the Vietnam War, or more recently, the nearly 2 decades following the events of September 11th.
Right, the global war on terror.
Exactly. The military spent 20 years engaged in counterterrorism and counterinsurgency operations against violent extremist organizations in places like Iraq and Afghanistan.
And they got really good at it, right?
Incredibly proficient. They learned how to track complex underground networks. They built local partner forces from scratch, and they navigated really intricate tribal politics.
But then the bust happens.
Yeah. As soon as the immediate urgency of those specific conflicts winds down, the institution's natural gravity just pulls it right back toward traditional warfare.
Which, I mean, makes sense from a bureaucratic standpoint, doesn't it? The culture of the military is heavily influenced by, you know, the fighter pilot, the tank commander, the aircraft carrier captain.
Right. The big conventional systems. They want to prepare for the massive conventional big-ticket conflicts against other huge armies.
So what happens? They just cut the funding.
They cut the funding for the advisory missions, they change the training center rotations back to massive tank battles, and they literally just shelve all those counterinsurgency manuals they spent 20 years writing.
That is wild. And the 2020 Annex explicitly states that the United States must not and will not repeat that cycle this time.
Yeah, the paranoia you detected is entirely justified because the global strategic landscape is shifting so dramatically right now.
Right. The nation is pivoting away from focusing primarily on Middle Eastern counterterrorism and moving toward what the doctrine calls GreatPower Competition.
Exactly, dealing with massive, highly capable peer competitor nations.
And the profound danger there is that military planners might look at a nuclear-armed peer competitor and just assume that irregular warfare skills are completely irrelevant now.
Right. They might think, well, we aren't fighting small insurgencies in the mountains anymore, so we don't need those skills.
Which is a huge mistake.
A massive mistake, because those skills are exactly what we need for great power competition.
Which actually brings up a really fundamental philosophical question. And it's one I think you, the listener, might actually be wrestling with right now as we talk about this.
What's up?
Well, the doctrine says this struggle can be nonviolent. But if there is no physical violence, if no one is dropping bombs or shooting rifles, how can the government legally or even morally call it warfare?
It's a great question.
I mean, To a normal person, it just sounds more like aggressive diplomacy or just nasty economics.
Right, and that is exactly the conceptual hurdle the doctrine is trying to force the military and the government to jump over. We have to completely expand our understanding of how force is actually applied in the modern world.
So how does the doctrine justify calling it warfare?
Well, the Curriculum Development Guide leans heavily into the idea that coercion, massive state-sponsored disinformation campaigns, economic sabotage, and political subversion, those are absolutely forms of warfare.
Because of the results they achieve,
Exactly. They achieve the exact same strategic objectives as a military invasion.
which is subjugating a rival nation.
Yes. But they do it by eroding the adversary's power and will without ever crossing the legal threshold into open armed conflict.
Taking that a step further, just think about the actual impact on a society. If a hostile nation-state uses advanced cyber operations to shut down an allied country's power grid during the dead of winter.
Which is entirely possible.
Right. And then they bankrupt their major corporations through market manipulation, and they use social media algorithms to incite violent domestic riots that completely paralyze the capital city.
The target nation is devastated.
Exactly. That target nation is just as defeated as if it had been carpet bombed by aircraft. The effect on the country is practically identical.
The mechanism is just invisible to the naked eye. It's a brilliant way to fight if you want to avoid a massive retaliation.
Joint Publication 1, Volume 1 relies on Karl von Clausewitz's famous theory here, the idea that war is the continuation of policy by other means.
A classic military theory.
Right. So if an adversary forces you to submit to their policy through economics and information, they have waged a highly successful war against you.
And they have waged that war while completely bypassing the United States military's primary defenses.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And this is exactly why the Department of Defense is desperately trying to institutionalize this mindset right now. If you only define war by the presence of explosions, you will not even realize you are losing a conflict until it is already over.
Wow. Okay, let us explore who is actually waging this invisible conflict right now. The doctrine introduces the concept of great power competition, which is sometimes also called strategic competition.
Right.
And I want to make a really crucial note here for you as you listen to this deep dive. Our purpose today is just to objectively report on the strategic assessments contained in these unclassified United States government documents.
Absolutely. We are just looking at the doctrine.
Right. We're not injecting our own political opinions, nor are we taking sides on any global geopolitical issues. We are simply unpacking how the official doctrine views the world stage.
Just reading the playbook.
Exactly. So, keeping that in mind, based strictly on the text of the 2020 Irregular Warfare Annex, who are the primary actors the United States is concerned about.
The doctrine explicitly names China, Russia, and Iran as willing practitioners of these indirect and asymmetric approaches.
Okay? And what exactly does the doctrine say they are doing?
It states they are actively utilizing campaigns of disinformation, deception, sabotage, and economic coercion, right alongside proxy, guerrilla, and covert operations.
That is quite a laundry list of tactics.
It is, and the document says they are doing this to compete for global influence and reshape the international environment in their favor.
But, why use those specific shadowy tactics?
What do you mean?
Well, if these peer competitors are wealthy, powerful nations with massive industrial bases, why do they rely on deception and economic coercion? Why not just build a massive conventional army, sail across the ocean, and challenge the United States directly on a traditional battlefield?
Right. The answer to that is found in a concept the military calls conventional overmatch.
Conventional overmatch. Break that down for us.
Well, for the last several decades, the United States military has possessed an overwhelming, historically unprecedented advantage in traditional warfare.
Like nobody else even comes close.
Not even close. They have the most advanced aircraft, the largest naval fleets, and a global logistics network capable of moving entire armies anywhere on the globe in a matter of days.
And adversary nations are well aware of this, obviously.
Of course. They have watched the United States military completely dismantle massive conventional armies in a matter of weeks. They know that initiating a direct traditional fight against the United States is basically strategic suicide.
So because they know they cannot survive the sledgehammer, they just refuse to stand in front of the brick wall.
Exactly. They refuse to play our game.
Instead, they operate intentionally in what the doctrine calls the gray zone. And, I found this concept so fascinating when I was reading through the joint concept for competing.
The gray zone is really where all the action is right now.
Right. The gray zone is defined as the competitive space that exists between Routine, peaceful diplomacy on one end.
Like normal international relations.
Yes, and open armed conflict on the other end. It is a space deliberately kept below the threshold that would legally or politically provoke a conventional military response in the United States.
And the brilliance and really the danger of the gray zone strategy is that it essentially weaponizes the United States' own legal and ethical frameworks against it.
How so?
Well, adversaries implement approaches that pursue their strategic objectives while meticulously avoiding the deterrent tripwires upon which the United States' national security posture is based.
Oh, I see. They know exactly where the line is.
They know exactly where the line is, and they walk right up to it without crossing it. Their stated intention is to win without fighting.
So they just chip away at American influence.
Exactly. They secure regional dominance, they slowly rewrite international rules, and they are constantly keeping the temperature just low enough that the United States cannot justify launching a full-scale conventional war in retaliation.
Let me push back on the United States' response to this, though, because this seems like a huge problem.
It is a massive problem.
If we know that peer competitors are actively using these gray zone tactics, if they are trapping developing nations in predatory economic loans, stealing intellectual property through cyber espionage, funding proxy militias in unstable regions, and running massive disinformation campaigns.
Yeah, all of the above.
Right. And we know they are doing all of this to erode our influence. Doesn't sitting back in a purely defensive, traditional military posture mean we are just completely ceding the initiative to them?
That is a very fair point.
Like if we just park our aircraft carriers in the ocean and wait for a conventional attack that we know is literally never going to come, aren't we just letting them win?
Yes, and that is the exact vulnerability the Curriculum Development Guide highlights.
Okay, so the doctrine recognizes this flaw.
It absolutely does. It states that deterrence and preparation for traditional war are necessary for national survival, obviously.
Right, you still need the big guns just in case.
Exactly. But they are completely insufficient for strategic success in the modern era. If a nation only prepares for the traditional fight, it leaves itself in the position of permanent disadvantage in the daily, ongoing struggle of strategic competition.
Because you cannot win a competition if you refuse to take the field.
Precisely. You have to play the game they are playing.
So how does the doctrine propose the United States actually fight back in the gray zone without accidentally escalating into World War III?
By proactively shaping the environment and actively expanding the competitive space.
What does that look like in practice?
The doctrine argues that the United States must impose costs on adversaries. We have to make their coercive tactics too expensive for them to pursue.
Expensive in what way? Just money?
Politically, economically, or reputationally. We do this by leveraging our own irregular warfare capabilities.
Okay, give me some examples.
So we proactively build the resilience of our foreign partners so they are immune to bullying in the first place. We loudly and publicly expose adversarial disinformation to completely ruin their international credibility.
Shining a light on the cockroaches, basically.
Exactly. We track and dismantle the illicit financial networks that are funding their proxy militias. We use irregular tactics to maintain a favorable balance of power on a daily basis, rather than just passively waiting for a crisis to occur.
Okay, so to impose those costs, the United States obviously needs a very specific toolkit.
Yes, a very robust toolkit.
But as I was reading through the Congressional Research Service Defense Primer, I realized there is a massive public misconception about who actually wields these tools.
Oh, the Hollywood myth.
Yes. When the average citizen hears the phrase irregular warfare, their mind immediately jumps to Hollywood imagery.
Of course it does.
They picture a Navy SEAL emerging from a swamp at midnight, or some ragged Green Beret training a secret resistance force deep in an undiscovered jungle. They just think irregular warfare is just a fancy synonym for special operations forces.
It is easily the most common myth out there. And the 2020 Annex actually dedicates a significant portion of its text specifically to dismantling it.
Really? The doctrine calls out the myth.
It does, because the myth is essentially a false equation that has poisoned a lot of strategic thinking. People believe irregular warfare equals counterterrorism, and counterterrorism is done by special operations forces. Therefore, irregular warfare is the exclusive domain of special operations forces.
But that is not true.
It is entirely false.
The reality presented in the doctrine is that you cannot win a global shadow conflict with just a few thousand elite commandos.
It's mathematically impossible.
Right. Conventional forces have an absolutely indispensable role in irregular warfare. But before we explore exactly how conventional troops do this, we need to understand what the actual missions are.
Let's lay them out.
The Defense Primer outlines 5 core missions that fall under the irregular warfare umbrella. And we really need to look closely at these for a second because they are incredibly distinct from one another.
Yeah, they cover very different types of operations. So the 5 core missions are unconventional warfare, stabilization, foreign internal defense, counterterrorism, and counterinsurgency.
Okay, let's break those down. Unconventional warfare is perhaps the most famous one, right?
Right. Unconventional warfare involves enabling a resistance movement or an insurgency to disrupt or overthrow an occupying power or an adversarial government.
So we're helping the rebels.
Exactly. Then you have stabilization, which involves maintaining or restoring order and basic government services in a fragile or failing state.
Keeping the lights on and the police functioning.
Yes. Then there is foreign internal defense, which is actually the exact opposite of unconventional warfare.
Wait, how is it the opposite?
Well, foreign internal defense is training and advising a legitimate partner nation's military so they can protect their own society from subversion or a rebel insurgency.
So instead of helping the rebels, we are helping the government fight the rebels.
Precisely.
Okay, and the last 2 are counterterrorism, which is, taking direct kinetic action against terrorist networks.
Kicking down doors.
Right. And counterinsurgency, which is a massive, comprehensive civilian and military effort to defeat a rebellion while simultaneously addressing the root political causes that started the rebellion in the first place.
Right, trying to fix the actual problem, not just shooting the bad guys.
But the primer does not stop at just those 5 core missions. It also lists related activities. And this is where the toolkit gets truly expansive and, honestly, kind of overwhelming.
It is a massive scope.
We are talking about cyberspace operations, counter-threat finance, civil military operations, security cooperation, and military information support operations.
And those related activities, those are really the connective tissue of the gray zone.
They hold it all together.
They absolutely do. You cannot conduct a successful foreign internal defense mission without counter-threat finance to cut off the adversary's funding, for example.
Oh, that makes total sense. You have to starve them of resources.
Exactly. And this broad toolkit really proves why conventional forces are mandatory. Historically, conventional forces led massive counterinsurgency and stabilization campaigns in places like Vietnam, Iraq, Bosnia, and Somalia.
Special operations forces just don't have the numbers to do that alone.
Not even close. You need tens of thousands of troops for those kinds of stabilization missions.
Let us ground that in a non-combat scenario to really show how a conventional force conducts irregular warfare today.
Okay, shoot.
Imagine the United States Navy sends an entire carrier strike group, we're talking thousands of sailors, dozens of massive ships, to conduct a joint training exercise with a small partner nation in the Pacific.
A massive show of force.
Right. But they're not shooting at an enemy, they're just running drills. But that exercise is pure irregular warfare.
How so?
Because by simply showing up, the United States builds a deep operational relationship with that partner's military. They demonstrate undeniable American commitment to that specific region.
It sends a massive message.
Exactly. That visible assurance makes the small partner nation feel incredibly secure, which in turn makes them far less susceptible to economic coercion or political bullying from a hostile, neighboring peer competitor.
Because they know the United States has their back.
Right. The physical presence of the conventional force fundamentally alters the political psychology of the entire region.
That is a perfect example. Or consider a conventional Army logistics battalion deploying to build a complex supply route or a massive medical clinic in a developing nation.
Like an engineering unit.
Exactly. That infrastructure project builds tremendous goodwill and legitimacy for the host nation government in the eyes of its own people.
Which effectively neutralizes the appeal of any insurgent groups who might try to exploit a neglected or angry population.
Right. If the government is providing healthcare and roads, the rebels have a much harder time recruiting.
That psychological aspect is just deeply woven into another crucial activity we need to talk about. Operations in the information environment.
Oh, this is a big one.
It is huge. Department of Defense Instruction 3000.07 lists this as a cornerstone of the modern struggle. The battlefield has literally migrated.
It's moved online.
Yes, it is no longer just physical terrain like mountains and rivers. It is social, cultural, and psychological. It is quite literally the smartphone in your pocket.
The Congressional Research Service primer defines military information support operations, which is what used to be called psychological operations.
Right, PSYOPs.
Right, but now it's military information support operations. It defines them as planned operations designed to convey selected information and indicators to foreign audiences.
To what end, though?
The goal is to influence their emotions, their motives, their objective reasoning, and ultimately the actual behavior of foreign governments or individuals.
To understand the sheer scale of this, think about how easy it is for a localized bot network to make a completely fake rumor trend on social media in your own hometown, causing real-world panic. We see it all the time.
Yeah, rumors spread like wildfire.
Now, imagine a hostile nation-state utilizing a multi-billion-dollar intelligence budget to do that same thing, but to an entire allied country's banking system or to their national election infrastructure.
It's weaponized information.
Joint Publication 1, Volume 1 describes the information environment as the aggregate of social, religious, cultural, linguistic, psychological, technical, and physical factors that affect exactly how humans derive meaning.
It is the pursuit of cognitive dominance. That's what they call it.
Cognitive dominance.
Yeah. Think about it. If an adversary is spreading fake news that undermines a democratic election in an allied nation, deploying an armored brigade of tanks does not solve the problem at all.
You can't shoot a fake news article with a tank.
Exactly. Countering that disinformation with verifiable truth, protecting the digital infrastructure, and ensuring the allied population maintains trust in their own institutions, that is an irregular warfare mission.
Because if you control what a population believes to be true, you effectively control the population.
Without ever stepping foot on their soil.
But this reveals a massive, almost insurmountable logistical and bureaucratic nightmare for the United States.
How so?
Well, if the tools required to win this conflict involve financial tracking, psychological messaging, building civilian infrastructure, and securing cyber networks, the military simply cannot do this alone.
Oh, they definitely cannot.
Even if conventional forces and special operators are working in perfect harmony, a guy with a rifle is just not the right tool to rebuild a foreign banking sector.
No, it's not in their skill set.
This brings us to a concept that sounds incredibly dry on paper, but is arguably the hardest part of this entire strategy: unified action and the whole-of-government approach.
Joint Publication 1, Volume 1 introduces unified action as the synchronization, coordination, and alignment of the activities of governmental and non-governmental entities with military operations to achieve unity of effort.
That is a very jargon-heavy definition. What does it mean in plain English?
It basically means everyone has to play on the same team and run the same play at the same time. In traditional warfare, the military is the undisputed lead agency. They are in charge.
Right. The generals run the war.
Exactly. But in the realm of irregular warfare, the military is very often just a supporting element to civilian agencies.
And this is a major paradigm shift.
Yeah.
We are so used to the Pentagon calling the shots in a conflict.
Right, but they aren't always the lead here.
Because in the gray zone, a diplomat in a suit or civilian aid worker might actually be the primary weapon system deployed by the United States.
That is a great way to think about it.
So who are the key interagency partners the military has to rely on for this unified action?
The primary players are the Department of State, the United States Agency for International Development, and the Department of the Treasury.
Let's look at what each of them does.
Yeah.
What is the Department of State's role?
The Department of State leads the overall diplomatic effort. They are out there building political coalitions, negotiating treaties, and managing the day-to-day relationship with foreign governments.
Okay, and the United States Agency for International Development?
They focus on long-term civilian assistance. They are the ones actually on the ground building robust civil societies, improving local healthcare systems, and fostering sustainable economic growth in fragile states.
Which, like we said earlier, prevents insurgencies from taking root because the people are happy and stable.
Exactly.
And what about the Department of the Treasury? They handle the money.
And they are absolutely vital. They utilize their massive intelligence networks to track, freeze, and seize illicit funding. They effectively starve terrorist networks and adversarial criminal proxies of the money they desperately need to operate.
But getting all of those massive, sprawling government bureaucracies to work together flawlessly, I mean, that sounds harder than getting my entire extended family to agree on a single pizza topping.
It is incredibly difficult, and the doctrine openly acknowledges this bureaucratic friction.
Does it really?
Yes. In fact, it points out that adversaries have a distinct structural advantage here. Authoritarian regimes use a highly unified approach to the gray zone simply by their nature.
Because they don't have to ask for permission.
Exactly.
Mm.
If a pure competitor dictator wants to execute a coercion strategy, they do not have to hold interagency working groups or get congressional approval.
They just do it.
They simply order their military, their state-owned banks, their intelligence services, and their state-controlled media to act as one cohesive unit.
The authoritarian advantage is forced synchronization.
Yes. And the United States, by its very constitutional design, does not work that way at all.
Right. We have checks and balances.
Exactly. No single government department has absolute primacy in prosecuting irregular conflict or managing adversarial competition. The Secretary of Defense cannot give orders to the Secretary of State.
And the Department of the Treasury certainly does not report to the military.
No, they are completely separate. Therefore, as the 2020 Annex explicitly states, the government cannot simply assume unified action will naturally occur. It must be pursued deliberately.
The government basically has to force these separate bureaucratic silos to communicate, share resources, and align their objectives.
Which is an ongoing daily struggle.
Let us look at a specific friction point that makes this synchronization so notoriously difficult. The clash of timelines.
Oh, the timelines are completely mismatched.
Think about how a military unit operates versus how a civilian agency operates. The military is heavily driven by a deployment cycle.
Right, the rotation.
A commander might deploy to a region on a strict 6 to 12-month rotation. Their mandate, their budget, and honestly, their personal career evaluation are based on achieving tangible tactical wins within that specific narrow window of time.
They need to show measurable progress before they rotate back home so they can get promoted.
Conversely, a civilian entity like the United States Agency for International Development operates on a completely different temporal horizon.
Decades, usually.
Right. They are looking at a 10, 20, or even 30-year timeline. You cannot build a resilient, democratic civil society or root out generational corruption in 6 months. It's impossible.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
They're trying to effect permanent societal change.
So the fundamental challenge of unified action is meshing those gears. How do you synchronize a military unit that is aggressively looking for a quick 6-month tactical victory with a civilian agency that is patiently playing a 20-year-long game?
It is like trying to synchronize a high-speed sports car with a heavy freight train. If they do not match speeds perfectly, the whole system just derails.
That is a great analogy. And that is exactly why the Curriculum Development Guide places such a heavy emphasis on shifting the military's terminology.
Right, the shift from campaigns to campaigning.
Yes, they want to move away from conducting short-term campaigns to the continuous ongoing act of campaigning.
And that grammatical shift is actually really important. A campaign implies a discrete military event with a clear beginning, a decisive climax, and a definitive end.
Like World War II.
Exactly. But campaigning, as a continuous verb, implies a persistent, enduring sequencing of military activities strategically aligned with other instruments of national power over a long period.
It is an institutional acknowledgement that strategic competition is an enduring condition that must be constantly managed.
Not a finite problem that can be permanently solved and walked away from.
Right. If the United States intends to compete with peer adversaries who formulate their strategy in terms of decades and centuries, the entire United States government, military, and civilian alike must adopt that exact same long-term horizon.
You have to play the long game.
To really understand how this intricate interagency long-term strategy actually works, we need to move away from the theory for a minute and look at how it plays out on the ground.
Real-world examples.
Yes. Because while terms like operations in the information environment and GreatPower Competition sound like they were invented in a modern tech lab 5 years ago.
They are actually ancient concepts.
Right. The core philosophy of irregular warfare is literally as old as the United States itself.
The Curriculum Development Guide provides some excellent historical context to prove that point.
Like who?
Well, it highlights General Nathaniel Greene during the American Revolutionary War.
Oh, interesting. What did he do?
Greene was leading a pretty desperate Southern campaign against a vastly superior British army, and he deeply understood the mechanics of irregular warfare long before the term even existed.
Oh, so?
He realized that using traditional military approaches, just marching his smaller, poorly equipped army into open fields against British cannons was entirely futile. It was suicide.
Right. He couldn't win the sledgehammer fight.
Exactly. Furthermore, he recognized that fighting without securing the deep support and logistical backing of the local civilian population was, in his own words, like making bricks without straw.
Making bricks without straw. That is brilliant.
He understood that the population's belief in the legitimacy of the American Revolution was the true center of gravity, not the physical destruction of British regiments.
That perfectly mirrors what we're talking about today. And the curriculum guide also walks through a string of historical successes, where the United States successfully employed these indirect methods during the 20th century, too.
Like the Greek Civil War.
Yes. In the late 1940s, the United States intervened in the Greek Civil War. But crucially, they did not send thousands of American combat troops to fight the communist insurgency themselves.
No, they didn't. They took a supporting role.
Instead, they supplied massive economic aid, military equipment, and a very small footprint of civilian and military advisors. They empowered the legitimate Greek government to win its own war.
And it worked. The guide also points to the Huck Rebellion in the Philippines following World War II as another great example.
What happened there?
The Philippine government forces, who were heavily advised by the United States at the time, realized they could not just shoot their way out of the insurgency.
They couldn't just kill every rebel.
Right. So they utilized targeted psychological warfare to counter the insurgents' communist messaging. They actively worked to win back the trust of the rural population by reforming their own military's behavior.
Fixing the corruption.
Exactly. And they even offered land and amnesty as incentives for insurgents to peacefully disengage and rejoin society.
So it was a holistic political solution, not just a kinetic military one.
Precisely. And then during the Cold War in El Salvador, the United States used an incredibly restricted number of military advisors, sometimes capped at literally just 55 personnel for the whole country.
Wow, 55 people. That is a tiny footprint.
Very small. Because the strategic goal was never for the United States to deploy an army and win the war for El Salvador.
What was the goal then?
The goal was to train and support the Salvadoran military just enough to prevent the government from collapsing entirely.
Just keeping them afloat.
Right. Thereby buying the crucial time needed for a long-term political and diplomatic solution to finally emerge.
Buying time for a political solution. Yeah. That is a brilliant encapsulation of the military's supporting role in these types of conflicts.
Those historical examples are foundational. But to see how all these doctrinal gears mesh together in the modern gray zone, we should probably look at a contemporary scenario.
Let's do it.
The Special Operations Forces Support Foundation actually provided a textbook example in their summary of the new Department of Defense Instruction 3000.07, and it perfectly illustrates modern unified action.
Okay, let us build this scenario out for the listener.
Yeah.
Imagine a coastal partner nation somewhere in a strategically vital region of the world.
Okay.
This nation is not officially at war. However, they are facing intense daily coercion and severe destabilization from a massive transnational criminal proxy network.
And this network might be implicitly funded and backed by a peer competitor adversary looking to gain a covert foothold in that region.
Right. Or it might just be an incredibly powerful, independently wealthy cartel.
Either way, they are a massive threat.
Exactly. Regardless of their origin, they are heavily armed, incredibly wealthy, and they are rapidly eroding the local government's authority and legitimacy in that coastal area.
So the partner nation realizes they are losing control, and they ask the United States for help.
And the United States responds. But they do not send a Marine Expeditionary Unit to storm the beaches and declare martial law in the town.
No, because that would play right into the adversary's hands. It would make the United States look like an imperial occupier, which destroys legitimacy.
Right. Instead, a very small, highly specialized Special Operations Forces team deploys to the country. Their explicit mission is to work by, with, and through the host nation's existing maritime police force.
They are not there to take over the jurisdiction or run the police department. They are just there to advise and enable the local cops.
And the mechanics of exactly how they enable the police are fascinating. Because they do not just set up a firing range and conduct, tactical shooting drills all day.
No, that doesn't solve the root problem. First, they focus on the money.
Follow the money.
Always. The United States advisors help the local police map the incredibly complex, illicit finance flows of the criminal network. They trace the fake shell companies and track the smuggling revenue.
So this is the counter-threat finance activity we discussed earlier.
Exactly. And it requires the military team on the ground to integrate intelligence and potentially coordinate all the way back in Washington with the Department of the Treasury to actually freeze those international assets.
That is unified action in practice.
It is. And simultaneously, the team addresses the psychological battlefield.
Right, because the criminal network has likely been running a sophisticated disinformation campaign.
Oh, definitely. They are probably spreading rumors through local media and social networks that the maritime police are completely corrupt or entirely incompetent.
Trying to turn the civilian population against their own protectors.
Exactly. So the Special Operations Forces team helps the host nation establish a simple, highly effective information cell to counter this false narrative.
How does the cell work?
They teach the police how to immediately share verified photographs and actual results of drug or weapons seizures. They help them broadcast community safety messages on local radio.
So this is military information support operations in action. They are actively fighting to reclaim the public narrative.
Yes. But the scenario goes even deeper into unified action. In parallel to the police advising, civil affairs personnel are deployed to assess the community itself.
The civilian side of things.
Right. And they quickly recognize that the local population relies on the criminal network's smuggling economy simply because their legitimate infrastructure is broken.
They literally have no other way to make a living.
Exactly. So civil affairs projects are initiated, perhaps funded in coordination with the United States Agency for International Development, to restore a massive, storm-damaged commercial pier in the center of the town.
Oh, wow. Building a pier to fight a cartel.
Yes, that pier is the strategic linchpin. By rebuilding it, they allow legitimate fishing fleets and commercial trade to finally return to the town.
Which fundamentally reduces the local community's economic dependence on the smugglers.
Exactly. They are attacking the root socioeconomic cause of the instability, not just treating the symptoms by arresting a few low-level smugglers on the beach.
And here is the absolute most critical part of the entire scenario for you listening. When the intelligence finally leads to actionable targets, and it comes time to raid the smugglers' warehouses or arrest the network leaders.
The host nation's maritime police make every single arrest.
The United States forces remain strictly in the background in an advisory and overwatch role. Why is that restraint so incredibly important?
Because it all comes right back to that core principle of legitimacy.
Right.
If heavily armed United States forces kick down the doors in a foreign town, it immediately looks like a hostile occupation. The adversary will instantly weaponize that imagery in their propaganda to prove to the locals that the host nation government is just a weak American puppet.
But when the local citizens see their own police force conducting the raid successfully,
it proves that their government is capable, sovereign, and legitimate.
So look at the comprehensive outcome of this unified action. The targeted arrests severely disrupt the criminal network's leadership and revenue streams.
The newly rebuilt pier provides a sustainable, legitimate economic alternative for the citizens so they don't have to work for the cartel.
The information cell ensures the public knows the truth about the police successes, leading the population to regain their trust in their local authorities.
And the host nation can now sustain this level of security moving forward with a minimal United States presence.
It is an absolute masterpiece of irregular warfare. Adversary influence is eroded, partner legitimacy is dramatically strengthened, and the freedom of action for malign actors is completely denied.
And the United States achieved all of this without firing a single conventional shot.
That scenario embodies the ultimate objective of the doctrine. It proves that creating local solutions to local issues is the absolute most effective way to build enduring, long-term strategic advantages for the United States and its allies in this era of great power competition.
It really ties everything together perfectly.
Which brings us to the culmination of our deep dive today. Let us retrace the immense amount of ground we have covered.
You covered a lot today.
We did. We started by radically redefining the battlefield. We learned that irregular warfare is fundamentally the struggle for legitimacy and influence.
Right. It is not the sledgehammer of traditional combat. It is the water seeping into the foundation.
It is the complex political chess game played in the shadows.
And we explored the treacherous environment of the gray zone. We saw how peer competitors deliberately utilize campaigns of disinformation, economic coercion, and subversion.
Because they intend to win without fighting, meticulously avoiding the massive conventional overmatch of the United States military.
Exactly. And we discussed the profound urgency within the Department of Defense to institutionalize these irregular skills so the nation does not fall victim to the boom and bust cycles of its own history again.
We also shattered the pervasive Hollywood myth of the sole operator. We proved that while special operations forces are essential, the massive logistical training and deterrence capabilities of conventional forces are equally critical to shaping the competitive environment.
And we examined the staggering complexity of unified action.
Meshing the sports car with the freight train.
Right. Realizing that the military must subordinate its short-term tactical goals to align with the long-term, decades-long campaigning of interagency partners like the Department of State, the Department of the Treasury, and the United States Agency for International Development.
And finally, we saw those complex theories applied in reality, where advising, threat finance, information operations, and civil affairs combine to completely stabilize a partner nation.
Proving that the most decisive victories are often the ones where the United States never actually takes the spotlight.
It is a massive, intricate architecture of strategy, but it is vital to understand that the doctrine we explored today is not just theoretical paperwork hidden in the vaults of the Pentagon.
No, it is happening right now.
It is the active operating system for how global influence is being contested right now, every single hour of every day.
And that is exactly why this matters so deeply to you, the listener.
Yes. It's very easy to dismiss military doctrine as something completely disconnected from your daily civilian life.
It feels very far away.
But tomorrow morning, when you open your browser and read the international news, we want you to look past the conventional loud headlines. Look past the troop deployments, the border skirmishes, or the announcements of new fighter jets.
Start looking at the massive economic loans with hidden geopolitical strings being offered to developing nations.
Look at the critical infrastructure projects, the ports and the telecommunications networks being built by foreign state-owned enterprises.
Look at the cyber attacks quietly targeting global supply chains.
And look at the automated state-sponsored disinformation campaigns flooding your social media feeds during local and national elections.
That is not just chaotic background noise.
No, it isn't. That is the very real, active, modern battlefield. You are watching irregular warfare happen in real time.
Every single day.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to ponder. We talked heavily about operations in the information environment today.
The cognitive domain.
Right. Joint Publication 1, Volume 1 notes that this environment includes the social, linguistic, and psychological factors that dictate exactly how humans derive meaning from the world around them.
And as we move deeper into the 21st century, undergoing rapid technological advancement, the rigid boundaries between our physical lives and our digital lives are completely dissolving.
Artificial intelligence, global connectivity, and predictive data algorithms are fundamentally altering how we perceive reality and truth.
It is changing everything.
So consider this. In the historical, traditional view of war, territory was measured in square miles of physical land.
Hills and valleys.
But in this new era of irregular warfare and great power competition, where the ultimate prize is legitimacy, influence, and cognitive dominance.
Are you simply a passive spectator watching global events unfold on a screen?
Or, as the battle lines shift directly into the psychological and digital realms, is your attention, your personal data, your belief system, and your very perception of reality actually the primary territory being fought over in the shadows?
That is something to think about.
Thank you so much for joining us in the room today for the Doctrine Deep Dive. We appreciate your time, your curiosity, and your willingness to unpack the complex realities of our world. Until next time, keep questioning the narrative and keep diving deep.